Thank you very much, David Ndii, for making time for us. David Ndii is the head of NASA Technical Strategy and Policy think tank, if I can call it that. You're also the People's Assembly Organizing Committee, a member of that, and an economist, a renowned one in the country, and have written extensively about the same. Thank you once again for being with us. So you have become a public figure. Articles have been written about this man, David Ndii. People are trying to understand who is David Ndii. In your own words, who is David Ndii?
Me.
Who is you?
The man sitting here.
Talk to me about that man.
No, I've been a public figure for at least 25 years. So I think all this drama about who I am and what I'm doing is actually more of a reflection of how our society is changing, and the young people have no sense of history. Because I've been doing what I'm doing since the early 90s. I was quite actively involved in the what we call the second liberation movement. I worked with some of the political leaders today. We worked very closely with people like Professor Nyang Nyong. We established, together we established a think tank called the Institute of Economic Affairs. I was actually its first chief executive. That was in 1993. I spent a lot of time in the 90s working with other people, with the IEA and other institutions, on strengthening parliament. So many of the people who were MPs and leaders in parliament in the 90s know me very well, because I was doing a lot of work on capacity building, helping them to understand economic policy. We worked a lot on revamping our what you call budget oversight law, which actually made it into the Constitution. I was actually quite actively involved as well with people like Willy Mutunga, Akivuda Kibwana, and others in the initiating the discourse on the need for a new constitution. In fact, I remember us organizing a small workshop with just a few people in Rumoro. Around 1996, where we actually began to map out a roadmap for how we can get a new constitution.
So you've been in the public sphere.
I've been in the public sphere
but
for
have
ages,
you received this kind of coverage, even in the media, like you are receiving now?
Yes. In the 90s, I was quite used to this. I wrote a column in the Sunday Nation in the 90s, which was very popular, Economic Notes. I was, a lot of people, you know, it was then even more sort of new to challenge and be very critical of the Moi government. And I, just as people now sort of ask, you know, the same questions were asked. So for me, there's absolutely nothing here. I did a TV show many years ago. I was a host of a TV show in the 90s in KBC. So for me, there's absolutely nothing new. I think it's about the youth who are not. If you go to the old footage, you will find my footprint.
So let's talk a little bit
public life for a very long time.
Let's talk a little bit more about that column you mentioned you used to write, the Economic Note, in the 90s. And you've said you've been involved in all of this various, you know, whether it's work with various organizations and been in the public life. But has your position changed with time? Would you say the things you wrote about, the things you stood for in the 90s, you still stand by those things?
I've been very consistent. I spoke out a lot about tribalism. I spoke out a lot about inequality and regional development, social justice, economic and social justice issues. I was very actively involved. In fact, I worked with John Githongo and others in setting up the Transparency International chapter of Kenya. That was extremely sort of controversial, at least from the regime side. I designed the research program, something called the Kenya Bribery Index, which still runs today. When we put it out the first time, the attack by Kamodo, who was then Secretary General of KANU and the KANU establishment, was vicious. I remember, in fact, just before we did that, we did a research. I produced a report. The first, in fact, research report we did as TI was on Harambee. And it came out, and the day it came out, it was something I worked on with, surprise, Anne Waiguru. She was my research assistant at the time. In fact, it was the first project she worked for me on.
Right.
And it made headlines on Saturday. It was a Saturday.
Yes.
And on that day, it made headlines. It was a league table of the people who had contributed the most amount in Harambees over the previous 20 years
Yes.
or so.
Right.
And it was asking where they got the money. And on that day, I remember George Saitoti and Kamodo and the Kanu establishment were doing one of their political Harambees. And they were very embarrassed about it. The party wrote a 3 to 4 page response, very hard hitting. So this for me, being in the middle of these controversies is nothing new.
And you say you've been consistent, but one of now publicly we've seen a person you've disagreed with, Mutahi Nguni, says you have not been consistent. One of the things he was talking about is that David Ndii has metamorphosized. That when you wrote the economic note, you were more rightist. But now we are witnessing a David Ndii that is radically leftist. A David Ndii that is doing what he's doing for different reasons and not at heart that perhaps this is all for the economic gain or the prominence of what this brings to you. What do you say to that? That your positions have changed? For example, that you were at the time against NGOs, human rights agencies, civil society, you criticized the same, and that appears to have changed with time.
I have no recollection of criticizing civil society since I've always been a card-carrying member of civil society. I mean, the IEA was the first sort of civil society think tank. And we set up specifically to create a space for people to be able to engage and debate public policy and public affairs, because they didn't exist in the Kanu era. So for me, promoting civil society is something I've done all my life. TI is a civil society.
NGOs?
NGOs. Those are NGOs. I mean, I've worked with all these people, Minor Care, all these people. These are my lifelong buddies. Mutahi, who's talking about that, we go back a long way.
He was your friend.
He is my friend. We were fellows, sort of, I was junior fellows at the IPA, one of the old policy think tanks. We had long-running debates on issues, these left-right issues. He's being disingenuous because I have always been an economic liberal. Even now, I advocate liberal economics. But I've always had a very strong position with regard to issues of social justice in Kenya. And those are totally, to me, there is no inconsistency. So, but the problem is these labels, left, right, liberal, non-liberal. If you sort of want to label people, the idea that I actually don't think that somebody like Mutahi is intellectually qualified to label me, quite frankly. But he obviously has his own political objectives for trying to do that. But as far as the issues of which I speak, I mean, fortunately, most of the things that I say and do are written, or they are on record in the media. I have been part of the political opposition all the way from the formation of Ford. So I have never shifted ground. I have worked with the people I am with today. We have been together since the early 90s. What has happened is many people from my part of the country who we started together have left and gone to the more pro-establishment. Kiraito Murainto left, Muite left, Koigua Muere left. So I think what you're seeing is I'm probably one of the few prominent Kikuyus who has not left and joined the tribal bandwagon. And that, I think, embarrasses some of my old friends like Mutahi. That's why they sort of make up those kind of stories.
Okay, let's talk about some of the recent events, the arrest and being taken away for interrogation. Briefly, how would you describe that ordeal?
I would not call it an ordeal in the sense that, quite frankly, the particular individuals who arrested me or abducted me, because they didn't arrest me. They didn't take me to a police station and book me in an OB. They did not sort of behave disrespectfully or in a manner that one would call harassment, other than for the fact that there was a lot of uncertainty as to what they're doing. I mean, I'm talking about in hindsight, with hindsight. But obviously at the time, you sort of psychologically prepared for the worst. But that's something I have been psychologically prepared. They'll take you out. I mean, driving in the middle of the night in the coast.
So did you at one moment think this is it?
Yeah. But I've been prepared for that for a long time. So you just psychologically sort of prepare that that's something that eventually that could happen.
Yeah. Are you worried for your family? Because your life, clearly, there's been that experience. We came in here, your lovely daughters, welcoming us. Are you not worried? It could be anybody coming and they're around. Are you not concerned even for their safety as well?
I mean, you make choices, okay? And once you make your choices, you live by them, and they have consequences. They can have sort of untold consequences. I would not be the first. You have to ask about the victims, people who have died. Some of them who did not make the choices I have made. I don't think Chris Musando made the choice I have made. So in that sense, I don't think the people the kids who are shot in their balconies, they haven't made the choices I have made.
But you have reconciled yourself to what may happen to you. But what about for your family who have not made those choices, but they are your family?
I think your family come to terms with living with who you are.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's who you are, People they also have their lives, and they have the choices that I have to live with. It's more difficult for some than for the others.
Yeah.
It certainly isn't difficult for my immediate family. It's not difficult for my wife or my daughter.
Yeah.
It's difficult for my extended family. But partly it's also because, being a Kikuyu, many people in my extended family, it's more a political issue that they find that I am taking these sort of risks for what they don't consider a cause that is worthwhile.
Yeah.
Since they support
Let's talk about some of the things we've seen you, publicly speak about. Do you consider yourself, for example, an expert in matters of cessation?
I don't know what you mean by expert, but I have been, for better or worse, been branded as the architect of that conversation.
Right.
And there's some truth in that. It's not a question of expertise. It's a question of purpose. So I am very comfortable with why I ignited that conversation. And it is doing exactly what I would hope it would do.
Which is?
Which is create a debate. In this country, we have tended to avoid the raw political debates about our political predicament and our political challenges as a society, and the questions of ethnic, of exclusion and marginalization and political domination, which have strong ethnic undertones.
Right.
But when you listen to formal political debate or formal public debate, there's a tendency for that debate to be moderated by the state and to be circumscribed, as the president is trying to do now, in the discourse, as a discourse on development, which is not the issue.
Right.
It is refusing to face up to the issues.
So at the core of this, for you, what is the main issue? Of why there needs to be this breakup?
No, the main issue is, I have explained this before. If you want me to explain it intellectually.
Not in simple language.
It is an intellectual subject.
Okay.
So there are some things you don't dumb down. The question of nationhood is a question of identity, fundamentally. Who is constituting this nation? what we call a nation state. We debated this quite a bit when we were doing the Constitution, and asked ourselves, is Kenya, or should we say, or frame Kenya and say it is a nation made up of individuals,
Right.
or it is a nation of different peoples, of nationalities, ethnic nationalities? It's a very fundamental question, what you conclude.
Right.
Because once if you conclude that it's a nation made up of groups, then how you structure your nation is fundamentally different when you say that it is a nation of individuals in a sort of simple Western liberal democracy sense.
Okay.
Then the group identity, group rights, including property rights, become fundamental issues. So that's what that debate is about.
Okay.
And it's a question of, should we be negotiating our Kenyan nationhood as just people, Sophie and David, with their individual sort of bill of rights, or are we communities, Kikuyus, Masais, Kisii, Kamba, Luos, who are sort of nations in their own right, and they have territory, and therefore they should exercise some autonomy and sovereignty. And you're talking about issues of confederation of different nationalities, of nations.
Do you truly believe that would happen in your lifetime, that this country will break up?
It's an intellectual debate. I said my
But can it actually happen?
My objective was to frame. That's what intellectuals do. We are not into statecraft. Statecraft is for other people. But I have contributed to framing this conversation in a manner that we have not been doing it before. Yet those are the issues that bother us as a country. They are the issues that are undermining.
So it's dialogue. It's a conversation you started. You're not looking to actually see this.
I have no problem with people deciding that it's not Kenya is not a politically viable entity, and therefore they decide how do we break it up, as long as we do it peacefully. I wrote recently and explained that at any rate, and this was in response to the issue of President going around saying he does not want to hear about people talking about it and territorial integrity, that we have already signed away that territorial integrity because we are signed up to the East African Political Federation. And only this May, that very president went to Arusha, and he approved what they're calling the transitional mechanism towards the East African Federation, called Confederation. Okay? So if we are going to be into a East African Confederation, then you have to ask, what's the big deal about asking whether that federation will ultimately be made up of 5 nations or sub-regions within those countries,
right?
Especially when you have countries as problematic as ours, and Uganda as well, which is now also very problematic in terms of its of nationhood.
You're part of the People's Assembly group, think tank. How far are you in as far as just developing the way forward and communicating the same to the supporters of the National Super Alliance?
We had our inaugural event, which was the Coast Region Leaders Forum last Sunday. That has launched the Coast process. The Coast people have their own agenda, how they want to go about it. I think they have stated that in January, the Coast has stated quite clearly that they want to negotiate this starting from a position of secession, which is the sort of far end of self-determination. There's a lot of self-determination sort of stages which are within one sort of nation state. Then we are going to we have a program of starting several others in January. By the end of January, we intend to have all the regions which have signed up, which said they want to do their regional sort of forums.
About 14 counties so far?
No, not counties. This is not a county-driven process. This is a people-driven process. Counties are creatures of government. County governments are creatures of government. What we have is people outside of government. I think we have to keep reminding people
Right.
that the people exist outside of government. Then they form the state. And then within the state has a government. So people are way above the state and they are way above
But we're
government.
seeing these motions being taken to county
The
assemblies.
motions
and,
taken to
even,
county assemblies
yes.
were the county assemblies were supporting. They said, we are in support of. And the reason for that is because if you go to our constitution, constitution says that the people can exercise their sovereignty at the national level as the people of Kenya and at the county level
right.
as the people of this county. So the elected representatives of the people of those counties have said, we support the establishment of a people's assembly.
Yeah.
But they are not of themselves the drivers of the people's assembly.
Okay.
Those are two parallel. The people's assembly is an external process. This is not new.
So when you hear about surcharging of the county assemblies because of even involving and conducting this business in the county assemblies, the Attorney General spoke about that. Honorable Duale has spoken about that. What do you think of it?
I really do not respond to that kind of nonsense. If you go to the law establishing counties, one of their mandates is to facilitate the people's participation in governance. Yeah? So the counties actually are mandated to do whatever, to convene people in whatever forums, to participate in matters of governance at the county, at the national level. Two, the National Assembly does not have oversight over the counties. Okay?
Right.
So even over county budget and resource accountability, the Constitution is very clear that the national and county level governments are separate and interdependent. It's not a hierarchy.
Okay, so you disagree with that?
It's not that they disagree because of facts.
Yeah.
Okay, that's propaganda, and it's misleading. It is partly because some of those people have refused to internalize the Constitution and accept that counties are separate entities accountable to the people directly,
Right.
in exactly the same way as national government is accountable to the people directly.
So you're now heavily and publicly involved with the affairs of the National Super Alliance, even at the leadership level. What would you say is your point of connection with the man Raila Odinga, if at all, in terms of his politics, what he stands for?
I stated that I have been involved in this since the early 90s. I was I was there when Ford was being formed with Jaramogi Odinga and the others. I actually have not worked closely with Raila before until after 2013. For the simple reason that our political paths went different ways for a long time. After Ford broke up, we were briefly in Ford Kenya. Then Ford Kenya broke up. And you had Raila went and set up NDP. Kijana Wamalwa went off with Ford Kenya. We left both. And after quite a process through something we call Mwangaza Trust and a bit of, no, I didn't go into Safina. We ended up with Professor Nyang' Nyong'o and the more intellectual wing of Ford. And the later Paulo Jonjo and other people, including Joe Kindugu, ended up in a party called SDP, which was abandoned by the followers of a man who died called, I forget, he was Mugambani.
Yeah.
He was a minister. So until again, when we all converged in NAC, we were all in opposition. But we were on different party tracks, interacting but not necessarily working together.
Right.
There's a reason why I'm providing this background.
Yes.
Then, of course, when we went into NAC sort of broke up. When NAC broke up, and again these people went off to do other things, I went off to do other things. I did not actually get actively involved in politics again for a while until after 2013, preparing for this general election. And by this time, it was clear to me and to other people that we needed to create a strong opposition platform to try and prevent what we already begin to see Jubilee doing, which was to begin to roll back many of the gains we had made, both through the sort of multi-party era and as well as in the Constitution. Those are things that are very dear to me, things which I've worked sort of most of my adult life towards. And then I got involved in that process, and the fact that it's only that if you look at the situation, I'm going back to Raila, is that Raila has emerged as the leader today of that movement. So that's the nature of the relationship. He's a leader of something
You stand
that
for.
have been that I've been involved in from the beginning. If it had been James Orengo, our relationship would be the same. If it had been Young Nyong'o, if Paul Muite had stayed on, if Kiraito Muraido has stayed with us, it doesn't matter. But that's exactly where I would be. So I don't look at it from a very personalized perspective. I look at it from the point of view that that's where who our leadership is now.
Yeah. So to him, he's leadership, and yes, he's the one leading this movement which you support and the ideals of the same. Do you have a personal though relationship?
Yeah.
Are there things about him that you admire?
Well, you don't
One or two.
You don't get to be who Raila Odinga is without admirable qualities. One, we actually have the same. We share certainly the sort of strong social justice focus, orientation in terms of politics. So there are many things politically I think we probably don't have a strong see things economically the same way. But then in those he very often defers to my expertise.
Okay.
And that's the way people who are able to work.
Yeah, and there are plans to swear him in, and the initial plans were postponed for Jamhuri Day, and we understand those have not been aborted completely or thrown away or put aside. There's intention to do that. The Attorney General has come out clearly to talk about that being an act of treason. What are your thoughts in as far as swearing him in? Because some in Jubilee say there shouldn't be a problem because he's going to be sworn in as a people's president, sort of like an NGO president, and they're presidents of all manner of NGOs, but not president of Kenya. So what are your thoughts?
That decision, I think, is entirely up to Raila Odinga.
Do you support it?
Raila Odinga has been in politics longer than me. And there are some things I sort of defer to his better judgment or political instinct.
But what do you think?
I think if he decides to do it, I think actually, let me say if he likes, it's going to happen. Or am I sort of mincing words?
Yeah.
It is going to happen.
But you're not 100% convinced that it's the right thing. You think that he may do it because he's been in politics longer, but not quite the wise thing to do.
No. I am absolutely certain that it is not treasonable.
So will he be president of NGO People's Assembly type of a situation scenario?
I think that it is fairly obvious that he is not. We are not going to march into State House. Okay, so that is not. That's part of our political strategy. Okay, and I don't think it's something that we really owe anybody.
So how do you think the government is anxious about this?
The government has a huge legitimacy deficit. Okay,
that's why they're concerned.
If you want to know why, you need to go back to your footage of Jamhuri Day. Because what the government did is, as is happening all over the world and particularly in this region, is a phenomenon which we are now calling as electoral authoritarianship, so that the new dictatorship model is not a single party state or a military coup. What you do is you capture the electoral agency and you intimidate the courts. So you have a ritual called elections every 5 years, but its outcome is predetermined.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, that was the plan, and it's actually been executed. It had a few hitches, like the Supreme Court annulling the election. But as you saw, even after that, they were able to come back and have that sort of sham election of the 26th, go through the motions of legality. The trouble with that system is that it may confer you legality, but it doesn't confer you legitimacy. And what this particular administration, which is backed by the interest of capital, both domestic and foreign, it needs not just political legitimacy, but it needs an environment which I might call business as usual.
Okay.
Now, they do not control those two variables. Yeah, those two variables, to a large extent, we control.
Do you think, in hindsight, it was a mistake for Raila Odinga to boycott the 26th election?
Why would you want to go to an election with a predetermined outcome? In fact, I was a very strong proponent of not going for that election.
Because what many thought...
What people wanted was Raila Odinga. The goal of Jubilee, in my view, in that election, was to defeat Raila Odinga. They needed to defeat Raila Odinga. And therefore, using the same method, give him something like 40%. They get sold for 60%. If he goes to court, the election is upheld, which was the intention in the first election. And then you then have the legality and some sort of force of political legitimacy to make him go away. The bitterness is that we denied them that
satisfaction.
That satisfaction.
You said, sensationally so, that if Uhuru Kenyatta is re-elected, the country will burn. Whilst, of course, unfortunately, lives were lost following these elections and during that electioneering period, it appears that now there's a sweep issues under the carpet and move on attitude that the country still is. So looking at what you said and where we are now.
I did not say that. I wrote in the same column which lots of people cite about secession. That is a column which 3 or 4 years ago almost, where I wrote that. And I said, if Uhuru is declared winner in another sham election, it's not necessary for people to jump that part. Okay? This country will ban.
And you think it was sham election?
I said sham election.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
but
you think this
let me finish.
last election was sham?
Let me finish. It was a sham election.
Yeah.
I did not give a time frame. So time will tell whether this country will survive this election. As it is, why are all these concerns? Why are people talking about dialogue? It is because I also wrote, and I've said, that I do not think, I wrote that, and I think I want to connect the two. I do not think that our post-colonial state as it has developed can actually be reformed. I think it has to be reconstructed or it will implode on its own.
So you still think the country will burn?
I actually think that this country is now on a trajectory of implosion. It's going to implode slowly. In the process of implosion, it could get to a point where that precipitates large-scale violence. So, as a prognosis, as an intellectual prognosis, that a sham election is the way to, is a slow burn. I didn't say it will explode immediately.
But the thing is,
the fact that the country is on a slow burn,
yeah,
I insist it's on a slow burn.
A slow burn, But yet we see that these issues are heightened around electioneering period, so that now that we're done with the election, the country is back, it appears, to normal. So what would this thing be between now and Uhuru's in second and last term be?
Well, what we do is we have this conversation 2-3 years down the road. Let's have it then. Because I think there's a make-believe wish that we are back to normal. We're not. I go around the country. People are very angry. There is a sense of despondency. This whole desperation about, you're talking about swearing in and all those things.
Yes.
The opposition will not go away. It will neither go away nor accede to the sort of things that these people would like to put on the table, coalition government, all that thing. It's not going to happen. I think we have now fairly irreconcilable differences across the country. They have very strong ethnic undertones, and we know what that does, particularly in Africa. So this illusion that, there's people wishing that...
So you stand by the statement, it has not banned, but it will ban.
It is banning.
It is banning.
It is banning as we speak.
There are those who say, if today, for instance, President Kenyatta decided we're going to create, through legislation, position for Prime Minister, have Raila Odinga come into government. There are those who say all of these conversations about secession, People's Assembly, the burning question you talk about would all disappear.
Yeah.
That by virtue of Raila Odinga being roped into the executive, all of the issues would dissipate. The whole concern about divisions in the country would disappear. People would feel included. Those that now talk about exclusion.
In research, we have you've sort of done a bit of social science. We have what we call null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. That's an alternative hypothesis. It's not been tested. So we'll be speculating. So it needs to be tested. If they want to do it, they can test it. If they think...
But what do you think? Because many think...
I don't think. I think I'm saying that's an empirical question. You say that's an empirical question. If people think that's the solution, then they should proceed and do it.
Would you still push and be one to very passionately involved with the People's Assembly and talk secession with that kind of a scenario playing out?
I certainly not likely to participate in that kind of thing, personally. So other people might. But as far as I know, at the present time, in the position, there is absolutely no interest in that sort of thing. Raila Odinga is not interested in being Prime Minister.
If it happened?
Raila Odinga, if I can speak for him on that one, I know he has absolutely no interest in going into government at this point in time. I think we all agreed that what we want is to safeguard democracy, because what you're suggesting is that we then accept that sort of thing. There are no reforms. In the meanwhile, Jubilee's stranglehold on the political and electoral system maintains, and we are back into a one-party state where now it will be a question of who, in the old KANU days, what mattered is who got the nomination from KANU.
Right.
So what you're saying is that we all, those politicians, I'm not political class, but you're telling the politicians that from now on, it is who kneels before Jubilee that is going to get a ticket. I don't think that people are prepared to go back there.
But the proposals around amending the Constitution to expand the executive, to have more of these positions, I mentioned the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, so that there's more representation, quote unquote, across the board. Do you think that is what will fix the divisions?
No, that is called consociation of government in political science. Right. It doesn't solve the problem.
What will solve the problem?
Electoral justice. That's the thing people are avoiding. You cannot have a democracy without free and fair periodic elections in which there is a probability of the opposition winning and the incumbent losing. And that once all these other things, if they do not address what is the point of being an opposition if you can never win an election? The motivation for being in politics, is the chance of you winning. You work hard
exactly
so that you impress the electorate so that next election you win. If you in government you work hard so that you impress the electorate, so that in the next election they re-elect you.
So what do you say to those who would argue it's almost cast in stone that William Ruto, 2022 is what we keep hearing, will be the president in that election? So that you're talking about electoral justice. How do we get that? Because he's in government, because the argument then is that those in government have ways and means to be able to ensure they can manipulate or work out scenarios, allegedly, to stay with power and decide where that power moves on to after they exit. So how do we get that justice then?
You are back to, you have now stated my slow ban yourself from your own mouth. Because what you're saying is that, and that's what you hear on the ground, that Jubilee has said Kanu is back, and that the Kikuyu Luo, the Kikuyu Kalenjin power elite that has ruled this country for the last 54 will rule for at least another 14 or 15?
Yeah.
So you're talking about until at least 2032. So what you're telling the other communities is that they sit back and accept being politically dominated by the Kikuyu and Kalenjin for forever.
Yes.
Now, once you do that, people do not accept. What they normally do is it begins with exit, some slow political exit. That's what you're hearing.
Okay.
If we are going to be dominated by Kikuyu and Kalenjin power elite for another 20 years, we are going to leave.
Yes.
So, but then the dilemma is, since they have captured the system, it is not in their interest to talk electoral justice. So, and it is not in the interest of our opposition leaders to go and kneel in front of William Ruto. So that's the political state.
So we are stuck.
Exactly. And that we're stuck there, what we are looking at is a slow implosion politically. Because you're saying that there is no social capital among the leadership to resolve the political crisis they have created.
There are those who say that you, the likes of James Sorengo and other politicians around Raila Odinga and advisors, are misleading him, seeking to inherit his constituency. What do you tell those people?
I think part of that constituency is, of course, our adversaries. And that's a backhanded compliment. They are saying that even after being incumbent and all the political ammunition they have unleashed, they have not been able to take us out of the equation, take Raila Odinga out of the equation. So we take that as a compliment, that they thought by now they would have pushed the opposition to accept Nusum Kate. I can tell you, we don't often say this, but the pressure and the emissaries who are sent and all the sort of backroom trying to, the diplomats and all the things, the sort of people who, the offers which are put on the table to accept that sort of constitutional government, they are unrelenting. So that statement is speaking to the fact that we have stood our ground. They're saying if only these advisors were out of the scene, we are the hardliners.
I'll take you back to the question of the swearing in of Raila Odinga and treason, what the Attorney General said he'd be charged with if that happened. As an individual, as those involved in these processes, there is the misprision of treason in that assisting a person who, or, you know, such an engagement to commit treason then would also be charged with the same. Are you not concerned for yourself and those that are doing this?
When we do the swearing in, we will then walk to whichever police station, nearest police station, and say, we are here, get on with it.
Charge us?
Yes.
So you're not scared about it?
Absolutely not.
President Uhuru Kenyatta is about to form government. You have written extensively about the economy and largely painted a picture of gloom and doom about where we are and where we are heading and the decisions that have been made. So if President Kenyatta, in forming his new government, decides He's my biggest critic. He sees and knows all the bad things with the Kenyan economy. How about I get him into my government to fix those problems? Would you take such a job?
No.
Why?
One, you work for people you respect at
Do
that
you
level.
respect the Kenyan people? Are you working for a man or the country?
No, you would have to work with them every day, and I don't respect them. And I think it is dishonest to there. I would have to pretend and call them sir, which I don't mean. Yeah. So, and I am a principled person.
So you stand to critique but not to do anything about it?
No, being
Can you do something about it?
Being in government is not how to. The idea there is a presumption in Kenya that only in government can you make a contribution to society. That what I'm doing is not important. That
But
being a bureaucrat.
he'd be acknowledging that what you've been doing in critiquing is so
consider,
important that he now wants you to transition to put that into
it is
action.
Not, I don't think he's qualified to chart my cause about how I contribute to my country. Uhuru is not my peer, professionally, intellectually, anywhere.
But you choose to look at it as to the person Uhuru that you say you do not respect. But what about the
I'm making
Kenyan
the
people?
following point. I consider ensuring and fighting to restore democracy in Kenya fundamentally more important and long-term than trying to rescue people from their own mess, which I have pointed out for many years, even long, and everybody's coming around to my view that the path, even they have approached me occasionally to say, okay, we now acknowledge that you say the economy is on the right track, is on the wrong track, and this thing, you say, oh, so what is the right track? And I have to listen. Democracy works as follows. You play, you pay. Okay? So, I am on the other side. I told you I'm the leader of the NASA policy team. If you read the manifesto, which I led the team to produce, it has stated how we ourselves would go about those dealing with those challenges. I have spoken about them. If people ask me, what I will not do is undermine democracy.
Would you work with the government at an advisory then capacity to help the country?
Been there, done that.
Now, would you do it now?
No. I have done it before, many times. I worked very hard on the economic recovery strategy.
So you intend to continue throwing stones, as some people would put it?
Yes, absolutely, because it's important. That role is very important. The roles which are being suggested are more lucrative. Yeah, it is the easier path. Yeah, and I don't need anything. I don't need anything. I don't need any more money. I don't need another home. I actually don't need anything material from government. So I will continue doing what I believe in.
Okay. As we bring this to a close, 2017 closing in a few days. What's your outlook? What are you looking forward to?
I am looking forward to our People's Assembly process. I think to me that is probably the most the thing I'm most committed to.
Yes.
Because it is actually breathing life into the Constitution. And breathing life in the most important part of the Constitution, which is about the supremacy of the Constitution and sovereignty of the people. Now, there are other people who are more preoccupied with, as I said, with this development mantra, that development is more important than politics. But I am of the school of thought that the fundamental problems that even development problem of this country is that it was built on a weak political foundation from day one. And as long as that political foundation remains weak, anything else you build on it will crumble at some point. So I think this, to me, the crisis is an opportunity to go back to the drawing board as people and see whether we can actually use that constitution to renegotiate our nationhood
All right.
and build a strong political foundation. I've accomplished that. I'll play golf for the rest of my life.
Would you ever run for political office?
Never say never, but it's not at this point anything I'm considering.
Yeah. If you would, what would it be?
I don't know. I said never say never.
Never say never.
It's not. I don't think that's my sort of orientation as a
Yeah.
person. I consider myself an intellectual.
Okay.
But I've seen many intellectuals end up in politics and sometimes do well and sometimes do very badly.
So never say never.
So I'll never say never.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, David Ndii. Much appreciated. Thank you.